Hey, welcome to Blackbird. We're going to change up our format for this series. This series is in honor of Black History Month, and we're calling it Black Profiles in American History. The videos will highlight different, often overlooked or little studied Black contributors to American history in big ways. As always, I'm Megan. We got Elizabeth and Ashley and Joe and Micah. Mike is going to do some housekeeping for us, and then we're going to jump into this.
Yeah, just really quickly, if you want to chat with Megan or if you have any comments or questions, there's a Facebook group. The link is below. So if you follow that, you can chat with her. She's there for you.
All right, so today Elizabeth's going to drop some knowledge for us. Elizabeth, what you got?
I'm going to be talking about Hallie Quinn Brown, which is also going to lead me to talk about a few other things. It's like this story has everything. I like to talk about. It's the suffragette movement. It's new light on a movement we were all raised to believe is infallible. Intersectional feminism. Daughters of the Confederacy. I just recently learned about them. I love talking to people about them. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This spans. This woman lived to be 100. So.
Whoa.
So I wanted to start. So yes, really. The reason I got interested in her was I was just researching like Black suffragettes because it's recently occurred to me that like that was mostly a white movement. It was actually very segregated. The white suffragettes were generally pretty nasty to Black women in order to, and Black men, honestly, to like further their own agenda for votes for themselves. So I came across a really fantastic article from, let me see here, the National Endowment for the Humanities. And I mean, it had me from the title. It's called How Black Suffragists Fought for the Right to Vote and a Modicum of Respect. So it's talking about a bunch of different women, but Hallie Quinn Brown is the one that they kind of spent the most time talking about. And I was like, oh, she sounds fantastic. And so I kind of started to look into her. I do want to start. Oh, yeah. So I'm going to kind of give a brief overview of the suffrage movement. And oh, see,
You're good.
I just, when I was talking about why I did this, also the other thing is one of the articles I read is in Hello Giggles, that it's for Black suffragettes who were missing from your high school history class. She is not in this article, but the woman who wrote it, Brooklyn White, I pulled a couple of quotes from her article, just her opinions that I feel like, yeah, it's like, this is why this is important. One is when you choose to ignore or just fail to research these women, you align yourself with the racists of the suffragette era. They too glazed over Black people and claimed forward strides for themselves. And the other part says, I pray for the day that white women realize that including others in the fight for basic rights does not taint the cause. So this is also still going on today. When like, yeah, the feminist movement is not necessarily inclusive. Okay, so let's see. The first Women's Rights Convention was in 1848. In 1868, the 14th Amendment was ratified that grants full citizenship to African Americans, but citizens and voters are defined exclusively as male. So Black women totally excluded from this. Then in 1866, which is before 68, the American Equal Rights Association was established. They worked for voting rights for everybody, white women and Black men and women. But in 1869, the proposed 15th Amendment, which prohibited discrimination on the basis of race without mentioning discrimination on the basis of sex, split that group up because there's like two schools of thought like whether to support this amendment since it doesn't address women at all, or to like take it and say like this is one more step. So they split into the National Woman Suffrage Association, the NWSA. That's Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony who led it. They were more radical, and they also catered more to white supremacy. Then the American Woman Suffrage Association, Lucy Stone, Henry Blackwell, Julia Ward Howe, they were more conservative and like tried to work state by state by amending individual state constitutions. But they had some Black female members, and they worked for civil rights as well as just voting rights. When the 15th Amendment passes in 1870, the NWSA refuses to work to have it ratified. Then in 1890, those two groups get back together and form the National American Woman Suffrage Association, which I'm just going to call NASA. And then Elizabeth Cady Stanton is the president. And in 1896, as a direct reaction to Black women being excluded from white suffragette spaces and events, Mary Church Terrell, Ida B. Wells, and Frances E.W. Harper, and Hallie Quinn Brown, like there was multiple people, but those are the three top ones I think that are listed, formed the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs. Is that right? Yeah. Their motto is lifting as we climb, which meant their mission was not only to win Black woman suffrage, but to work to ensure that Black men are actually allowed to vote, because Jim Crow laws in the South prevented them from actually voting. Even though technically it's legal, they can't actually do it. Let's see. And so, yeah, I mean, 19th Amendment passes in 1920. This is a brief overview. I summed it up saying NASA members insisted that they needed the support of Southern women in order to get an amendment giving women the vote to pass. So they excluded Black suffragists from their conventions and marches. They refused to denounce racial segregation and Jim Crow, and went so far as to trash Black men and women to get more for their own platform. They claim they did it for Southern support, but likely they were making excuses for their own racism. Yeah. And the last thing, yeah, for white women, the right to vote was fairly symbolic, just to like make them equal to their husbands and brothers. Whereas for Black women, it actually meant like getting involved and getting things done to help protect their own communities. All right, so Hallie Quinn Brown, she's born either 1849 or 45, or maybe 1855. Likely it's like 45. I don't think it was as late as 55, but I did think it was funny. Like, it's very hard to get it pinned down. Her parents were both born enslaved, but so her father bought his and his family's freedom, and her mother was the granddaughter of a white slaveholder who freed her. And I could not find any more about these families. Like, this was kind of interesting to me. I want to quote one article I was looking at. It says, her father, who bought his freedom and that of his family members, was the son of a Scottish enslaver and her Black American overseer. Her mother was the granddaughter of a white enslaver who had fought in the Revolutionary War, and she was freed by this grandfather. But yeah, I would like more details about both of these stories. I don't know if either of those happened often, but they both sound like things I haven't heard. I know like buying your freedom happened. But yeah, I just both of her parents actively involved in the Underground Railroad. They moved to Chatham, Ontario in 1864, and then back to the US so that she could go to Wilberforce University in Ohio in 1870. She graduated in 1873 as salutatorian with a Bachelor of Science. She started teaching in rural areas starting in South Carolina. So she was very education focused. And yeah, her main focus was improving the literacy of people who had not had the opportunity to learn to read and write while they were enslaved. She taught in public schools and also worked with elders, which I said, I'm assuming also people who had not been able to get an education because of slavery either. After South Carolina, she taught at a school on Sonora Plantation in Mississippi. that I mentioned just because I want to read this excerpt from a profile of her from 1895 that it's also on Wikipedia. It says, she next took charge of a school on Sonora Plantation in Mississippi, the people much hindered by the use of Tabasco and whiskey, twin vines. Her plantation school had no windows, but it was well ventilated and the rain beat in fiercely. So well ventilated is hilarious. Not being successful in getting the authorities to fix the building, she secured the willing service of 2 of her larger students. She mounted one mule and the 2 boys another, and thus they rode to the gin mill. They got cotton seed, returned, mixed it with earth, which formed a plastic mortar, and with her own hand, she pasted up the holes.
Wow.
Nice.
Oh, let's see. So then in 1885, she's the dean of Allen University in Columbia, South Carolina, and also an administrator of a night school there. She left in 87 to get her Master's of Science at Wilberforce, and she was the first woman to do so, which is only in one article. In 1892, she's the dean of women at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and worked with Booker T. Washington for a year. Then moved back to Dayton and taught for 4 years and established a night school for migrant workers. And then I said, see, this is what I mean when I say I'm not doing enough. So from 93 to 1903, she's a professor of elocution at Wilberforce, but she wasn't on the property a lot. She did a lot of traveling and lecturing on behalf of the school. In 93, she also promoted the organization of the Colored Women's League of Washington, D.C., which later became part of the National Association of Colored Women. So that's 1894. She traveled overseas to perform quite a bit and spoke on Black American life and culture in Great Britain and performed several times for Queen Victoria. In 95, she spoke, it was 1895, she spoke at the convention of the World's Women Christian Temperance Union in London. She was one of only 3 Black women to do so. And in 1899, she represented the U.S. at the International Congress of Women in London. Let's see. She did become the president of the National Association of Colored Women from 1920 to 24. And I'm going to read a direct quote again. It says, as president, Brown charged the women of the NACW with picking up where the movement for the 19th Amendment had left off. So, yeah, once the 19th Amendment was ratified, the white suffragists were like, well, we did it. We're done. We've done our work. We've done here. So, yeah, it says, the enfranchisement of hundreds of thousands of Black women, the majority of the American South, was not yet complete. Brown led thousands of club women with the same vision that had initially drawn her to the podium in 1889. Brown urged Black women to regard the ratification of the 19th Amendment as an opening for an acquisition of power. She framed women's votes as the next chapter in the long struggle for Black political rights. We stand at the open door of a new era. For the first time in the history of this country, women have exercised the right of franchise, the right for which the pioneers of our race fought but died without the sight. Okay, so in 22, while she was president of the NACW, a bill was proposed in Congress to allow the United Daughters of the Confederacy to erect a monument on public grounds as a gift to the people of the United States. Wait for it. Titled Monument to the Faithful Colored Mammies of the South.
Oh, no.
Oh, hell no.
No.
Hell no.
Wow.
Yeah.
No.
They thought they were doing the most.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Oh.
Difference and gratitude.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just
okay. No,
Ugh.
it's kind of the same. That's where the National Health Endowment, not health. whatever. The first article I was talking about, that's where it starts. So yes, it's like she sees it, and a lot of other people see it for what it is. This is a distraction. This is like, no, what you actually need is like access to safe housing and schools and medical care. Not a statue. Oh, and made a note here. Where is it? Yeah. So it's 22 when they proposed it. In 1926, the UDC also funded the building of a monument to the KKK. So in case anyone questions what they actually support. Real quick too, in case anybody doesn't know, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, per Wikipedia, I think this is a pretty good definition. The American Hereditary Association of Women engaging in the commemoration of Confederate Civil War soldiers, the funding of monuments to them, and the promotion of the pseudo-historical lost cause ideology and white supremacy. They do insist they don't support white supremacy, but like,
but it is. I mean, it is. It is.
Not like
they're about that life.
You can't do one without having the other.
Okay, so
Sorry again.
no, that's okay. I got ahead of myself. So yeah, it's a statue of a Black woman caring for a white baby, representing the idea that Black women were suited to slavery, preferred it, and were totally loyal to their enslavers, damaged the reality that Black women were strong and intelligent, resisted to being treated as property, and held no love for their oppressors. And yes, from an article I read, says she doubted the deep reverence and gratitude professed to undergird the monument. White Southern women would better make restitution, Brown advised, by interceding with their husbands and fathers to, with one hand upraised, stop mob rule and lynching. Yeah, essentially, don't give us a monument, treat us like humans. So, in 1926, she published a book called Homespun Heroines and Other Women of Distinction. She collaborated with more than 25 other women to detail the lives of 60-plus Black women through biographical sketches, essays, and poems. It was an answer to the caricature presented by the UDC and other white supremacists, showing that, of course, Black women were strong and intelligent and independent and should absolutely be defended in their right to vote. A quote that I took from her introduction says, "In presenting this volume to the public, it is proper to remark that it has been prepared from a settled conviction that something of the kind is needed." So yes, once the 19th Amendment is passed, white suffragists are like, all done. So something to know, though, is, let's see, Jim Crow laws are still in full effect in the South. And in fact, the entire Black community wasn't fully enfranchised until the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, which I didn't know that much about it until I read this story. Like I said, it's a thread. It's great. So yeah, I was reading to see like how much of this do I really want to go into. I don't think it really matters, but yeah, it was a far-reaching legislation. It basically like actually banned discrimination. Oh yes, I do want to say under the impact section in Wikipedia, this says nearly 250,000 African Americans registered in 1965, 1/3 of whom were registered by federal examiners. In covered jurisdictions, less than 1/3 of the African American population was registered in 1965. By 1967, this number increased to more than half, 52.1%.
Wow.
Yeah. And a majority of African American residents became registered to vote in 9 of the 13 southern states. Similar increases were seen in the number of African Americans elected to office. Between 1965 and 85, African Americans elected as state legislators in the 11 former Confederate states increased from 3 to 176.
Wow.
And yeah, nationwide increased from 1,469 in 1970 to 4,912 in 1980. Let's see. And one last note on this. And so yeah, as far as Hallie Quinn Brown, that's kind of the last thing that all the articles that I found talk about. She died in 49. But I think Homespun Heroines must have been, like, it's the last book she published as far as I can tell. I'm sure she did things in those last, like, what is that, 20 years? But I can't really, I mean, I think she would have been in her 80s at that point. So I could not find any more information about that. But I did, yeah, I wanted to note just on the end, it's at the bottom of an article in the Indy Star of all things, just like some little paper from Indiana, that does say, other people of color also struggled for their voting rights. Native Americans didn't see legal barriers to voting removed until 1948. Voting rights for Native Americans in all states wasn't secured until the 1960s. People of Asian ancestry were only able to vote in 1952 when the McCarran-Walter Act granted them the right to become citizens. So I feel like there's a whole lot more to dive into. But yeah, that's the overarching theme is Black suffragettes did a lot. And I think people are starting to talk about it a little bit more. More than none, because yeah, like I said, it's like not even something that had really occurred to me until recently. So
Woohoo! It's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot.
But
Yeah.
that's really cool that like she was so focused on education, and that like even after they got the right to vote, she was like, hey, like we're still not there yet. Like let's keep going. And I think like when you talk about intersectionality, like that we're still doing that today. Like people talk about like the Women's March, and there's like women of color and white women and like every kind of woman at the Women's March, and then like the Black Lives Matter March, mostly Black people, and it's like we're looking for that intersectionality. Like we show up at your march, you show up at our march.
Yeah. But also, yeah, and that's a real good point too. But I remember, I think that might have been what kind of clued me in to begin with, that like feminism usually means white feminism, was the Women's March, was because a lot of Black women did feel totally like it felt to a lot of people like a white women's march. So
yeah, so I think that's really there's a history. So it's kind of good to know that like that's not new history. That's like something that has been going on.
Yeah.
The suffragette movement and before, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting. Thank you. Joe, Ashley, Micah?
Well, my question was, like, to the present day, there's still like blatant segregation or whatever in the feminist community. Like we're not gonna all just support each other. As I'm clueless on that aspect. Although I shouldn't be, because you have the Million Man March, and there really wasn't any intersectionality there. But I don't know. I get it. Obviously, we've been discussing this for months now on different aspects of it. I guess I'm just more disappointed that there's no. It's like, hey, you support me, I'll support you, and we can do this together. But no, no kumbaya.
I think it can be a problem where like white women feel like we're not the highest, like we're still oppressed. So it's the same thing as like the privilege thing. It's like, oh, I still have had a hard life, so
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, it's like it's a competition or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's that like, well, I don't have the same rights, and I don't know, I'm not a white woman. Like this is for you and Micah, really. But like my thought is that it's like I don't have the rights, so I'm fighting for me. Whereas I feel like Black women especially are like, I'm fighting for all of my people. Right? I'm fighting for Black men. I'm fighting for anybody who's oppressed. Like I'm fighting for all of us. But that could just be like me, hippy dippy, like Black, like we're great. But I guess like that would be an interesting, like Micah, how do you feel about intersectionality as a white woman and as Micah?
I do. What I was thinking about while you guys are talking is that like every time that Black women or the Black community fight for something, it gets better for everybody. And especially like these last months, looking at the history, like it happens every time. And I think you're right. White people aren't fighting for the good of all necessarily, historically speaking. They're not doing that. It's like I got mine, so figure out your own thing. Kind like it sort of goes back to the bootstrap argument that drives me bananas.
Bananas. So bananas.
I was gonna say, just on that, I watched One Night in Miami the other day, and it was one thing that the character of, the Malcolm X's character basically was saying, we're going to the table, and although I don't like my oppressors or whatever, they're getting all these liberties or whatever, and we're getting scraps, and we just can't be satisfied with the scraps. Use your power and influence to uplift, in that time, the Black community, but in uplifting the Black community, it uplifts everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But he's like, you can't be satisfied with just getting the leftovers. It's like, yeah, you're successful and you're making money and everything, or however it impacts for multiple leaders of that era. But you can't just be satisfied with your own personal success and leave your community behind. You have an opportunity and a voice to uplift and help us further these causes that we're trying to do. And just this suffrage issue just brings more to light of that, is that people in the Black community are doing that, and it does uplift everybody, whereas it's not, and I don't want to say genuinely not reciprocated, it just doesn't seem on all fronts. It's like, well, we're fighting, and if there's you take what you can get, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, we'll take that as well, This,
Yeah.
I don't know if I articulated that well, but I hope that y'all are trying to get the point that I'm putting out.
That makes me wonder. I wonder if it's got something to do with like, I don't think white people really think about like a community so much, because like that's what it is, like to be, the standard is like, well, you're not a community. Like, I feel like white Americans in particular are so individualistic. That is part of the problem.
Mm.
And that's also part of why they can't come to like the table and just like acknowledge anything bad about themselves, because like it's all on like this one person. Like, I am an individual, and if anything is bad about me, since I stand alone, like that would be terrible.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Like, that's I've never thought about it that way.
I hadn't either, but I do. I wonder if that's a factor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like you've given us a lot of topics for us to like add to our list of things we should talk about. But any other comments or questions for Elizabeth? And then I need verbals, please, guys. I need like a note.
No, I was just
I think
surprised at the dates of indigenous people and the Asian community, kind of how recently they gained rights. Like, that's
that right at the end, like today when I was like just looking, I was looking for another picture or something, and I found that article, and I was like, wait, what?
Sort of like that one I kind of understand because of World War II and the internment camps with Asians.
Oh.
Not that it's fair or that it's right, but like that date makes sense because of World War II for me.
But yeah, I don't know how we like. Yeah. The more you think about the concept of race, the more crazy it is, really.
Yeah. Totally.
Yes.
Like how deep it really spreads into so many different groups. Like it's wild.
Yeah, we just scratching the surface.
Right. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening today, and thanks Elizabeth for talking to us about Miss Brown. Our next series is gonna be on the N-word, history, and is nigga okay to you?
Mm-hmm.
No. Thanks for watching, and as always, don't be a racist and wash your hands.